Welcome everybody with another episode of our webinars. My name is Barry Kassab and I'm in MCA Market Development for Shure. Today's episode is going to be handling a very interesting topic. It's one of the most frequent asked questions that comes to our emails, which always contains a subject that says, what is the right mic for me? But according to me, which is where the title is coming from today, which is according to Barry, I want to talk about the ground rules of how can you select any microphone based on the application you're looking for. Initially, I'd like to apologize. I've lost my voice due to the webinars. So if I sound a bit raspy, so my apologies. Second thing, there's a Q&A box on your right side in your webinar application. You can feel free to ask questions anytime and we'll handle them at the end. So let's get back to our topic today, which is what are the ground rules to select any microphone. Now, before we talk about these ground rules, we need to talk about the standards. I know that we talked about them earlier in some of the other webinars, but let's kind of go through them really quick and just kind of to get an idea about these standards that we select microphones based on. First of all, we know that we have dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. The most difference between them is that the condenser microphones can be more sensitive to lower volume sources, or you can mic with them far sources. So that's the standard number one. Dynamic microphones need to have a closer proximity versus condenser microphones, but they can handle loud sources as well. So they are suitable for things or instruments that has a very high sound pressure level or high SPL. So ground rule number one, should we go with a condenser microphone or with a dynamic microphone? Second thing is, we need to know about the frequency response. Are we going to go with a flat frequency response or with a tailored frequency response? Now, again, to review that, we've spoken about that earlier in other webinars, but I'll review that again. Flat frequency response picks up the source exactly like how it sounds. It will not add any coloration, or I can put it in another way that the flat frequency response microphone has the same sensitivity to the spectrum from the lowest frequency up to the highest frequency. A good example to this is pencil microphones, SM81, KSM137, KSM141, and there are a few other microphones as well with a side address microphone like the Beta 27 here. This is a side address microphone, so this should not be mistaken for the kind of microphones that I'm using. For example, today I'm using a KSM 42. It's the same shape of this microphone, but it does not sound exactly the same. So whenever you get a microphone with a flat frequency response, you need to always keep in consideration that the sound that the mic picks up is equal throughout the spectrum. This is typical for instruments that sounds good as it is, and you do not want to change the sound of the source. And that also happens on some dynamic microphones. So there are also dynamic microphones with flat frequency response. Example to this is a KSM8 or an SM7B. These two microphones are known to have a flat frequency response, though they are dynamic microphones. And of course, the reason why the SM7B is quite famous out there is due to this feature as well. But the SM7B as well is one of those microphones that you can actually tailor the frequency response by changing the switches on the back. Same thing with some of the condenser microphones. Or most of those condenser microphones today, they have a low frequency roll-off, which starts to tailor the frequency response a little bit. But it's based on the application. I will handle that in a bit. So reviewing that again, condenser versus dynamic, tailored versus flat frequency response. Now, the third point that we need to pay attention to is the physical size of the microphone or the mounting capabilities or the mounting features of the microphones. So I was talking about this microphone just a minute ago, which is a side address microphone. So that means side address microphones picks up the sound from the side and not from the top. So if you see anybody on the movies using one of these microphones like this, you can know that it's a bluff. Or I've seen some of the movies, they use the Super 55. Also, it's a side address microphone. One of the very early days with a side address microphone, this is used from the front. Some of the movies, you see them mounting them like this or like that. Also, it's just a prop. Doesn't mean that the microphone works like this. So this is one of the things as well that you need to pay attention to. Now, these are the most basic things that you need to pay attention to. Now, there are also more details in terms of talking about mounting features if you want to go into lavalier microphones. So lav mics, I have one here in front of me. So lav mics are really small, like they're almost like sub-miniature compared to the microphones I was handling before. A lot of them come with different mounting clips, either a double face sticky tape or a clip, or some of them come with an instrument clip that is tailored to handle lav mics. These are suitable to also certain instruments that cannot handle heavy weights on top of them. A good example to this would be violins. So violin already is a lightweight instrument, and it's you balancing it with your neck and chin and your hand. So what happens if you add a heavy mic on top of it, it might be unbalanced or also might hinder the sound. So lav mics usually are quite suitable. Or then you need to use a pencil microphone on a stand away from the violin, but it will hinder your movement. A lot of the violinists need to move while they play, or their natural movement as they play is they kind of pan left and right. So this kind of movement might be then pushing the instrument to get close to the mic or far away from the microphone. So usually lav mics are quite suitable to these instruments. Some wind instruments like the Arabic nai, or which is the flute, there are variations, ethnic variations in different places in the world. In that case, a head-worn microphone could be suitable, or the player would be with a stand on a condenser microphone or a dynamic microphone, but he needs to kind of maintain a certain distance. Now, these are the most important things that you need to always take in consideration when you select a microphone. Now, the second stage to the first one, which I talked about. So to review the first one, we talked about the type of microphone, condenser, dynamic, flat response versus tailored, physical mounting of the microphone, which includes the lavalier that we talked about. So these are the first considerations to take in whenever you want to use a microphone. Now, the second stage to this is the type of sound you're trying to record. Now, there's one point that a lot of people tell you about, which is called ear training. And a lot of people who know me would hear me talking about this. Now, just like you know the difference between a male voice and a female voice, because your ear knows that. And it's heard that long time ago, and now it's printed in your brain. Whenever you hear a kid versus a baby versus a young boy, or let's say a young adult, let's say, who's starting to change his voice, and then an adult, male or female, your brain already tells you, based on the voice, their age or their genders. Now, the same thing happens with instruments. The moment you hear the instrument, you need to kind of have an idea what kind of frequency response you're looking for. But you need to kind of initially isolate frequencies in two groups, the bass and treble. This is very basic. Everybody knows that. Most of the stereos and the amplifiers would have these controls on them if you're familiar with them. If you're not, I strongly advise you to get familiar with them and just kind of start to fiddle around with those. On your phone, you have, most of the phones right now would have an EQ or an equalizer. An equalizer would segregate the frequencies from low frequencies to high frequencies. But if you get your EQ and you split it in half, the lower register, let's say anything from the middle down to the left side, is bass frequencies. And anything from the middle onwards is the high frequencies. But if you split your equalizer then in 3 groups, then you have your bass, which is the first third on the left. Then you have the middle register, which is your mids or mid-range. And then you have the upper register, which is the high frequencies or treble. Now, the kind of timbre generated from instruments would change a lot of these. So some of them will have a lot of mids and highs. Some of them will have a lot of mids and lows. Some of them will have only lows. Some of them will have only highs. And some of them will have all of that together. Now, there is other, let's say, characteristic to timbre, which is the waveform. But, luckily, microphones respond to these anyway. So it doesn't make a big difference. So I'm not going to talk about waveform right now or the shape of the sound, because not all the sounds will have the same shape, regardless of the frequency, which gives the signature of sound. So what makes Barry's voice different than, John's voice, different than Mohammed's voice, different than Hassan's voice, is the shape of his sound and not the frequency. So that means the waveform generated from us is different, which gives us the fingerprint kind of thing, or the voice stamp that would segregate people from each other. But the same thing happens with instruments. But microphones generally would have a wide frequency response coverage. The least would be from around 60 hertz up to 15 or 16 kilohertz. Any microphone that can do this is good enough to do vocals. Now, if it can do lower than 60 hertz, it's still good for vocals, but you might need to do the high frequency roll-off, which looks like this. I'll show it to you on a camera. If you look to that switch here, I'm not sure if it's quite obvious, you find a line that is kind of like an L, but it's horizontal, so it'll have a shape like this. So this means it's rolling off the low frequency or removing unwanted low frequency that the mic can pick up. Now, this is quite useful when you're using it with vocals, because with vocals, you don't need the low frequency. If you tune to some of the, if you tune to an AM channel, amplitude modulation, the radio channel, sometimes you find that the bass is way too much, that the speaker is over vibrating when the news anchor is using it, or is speaking out the news. And the reason is because of the way the signal is modulated. But you find in some situations when the voice of the radio, the RJ anchor or the news anchor is too much, you find the speaker is over vibrating and it's becoming irritating. So having the bass roll off is quite useful in that case. So then you remove the bass response from the microphone and you keep the useful frequencies for the vocals. Now, the useful frequencies for the vocals, you may write that down at the moment if your ear is not trained to this, but you can easily say it's from about 120 hertz up to 10 kilohertz. This is the useful frequency range for vocals. Now, generally, our ears are more sensitive to high frequencies and less sensitive to low frequencies. And also, our ears are quite sensitive at some of the mid frequencies, especially between 2 to 4 kilohertz. So generally, when we pick up microphones, first thing that kind of becomes a bit annoying when we hear our voices is the 2 to 4 kilohertz. And when we hear that, we automatically try to reduce that in the post-production or on our timelines, or when we are processing our vocals. But also due to the proximity of the microphones, because usually microphones are not stuck to our mouths, there's a kind of a distance. So let's say The average distance for a microphone is about a good 10 to 12 inches. Now I'm keeping about 12 to 13 inches away from the microphone, which is quite good. But that means also the microphone sensitivity to some frequencies is not as good as when I'm close to the mic. So if I speak closer to the microphone, you find that the sound changes a lot and it sounds like I'm right in front of you. But when I step away, it becomes more comfortable to hear. But that means also sometimes we need to add a little bit of emphasis on the high frequencies, that are above 4 kilohertz. So most of the vocal microphones that are, let's say, called as a vocal microphone, they are automatically, not say automatically, they are pre-manufactured with more sensitivity to some frequencies and less to others. So picking up the famous SM58, my colorful UAE flagged SM58, this one has less sensitivity to low frequencies, below 60 hertz. And it has a higher sensitivity to high frequencies, above 6 kilohertz or 5 kilohertz. It starts from 3 kilohertz onwards and reaches the peak around 5 kilohertz. That means this microphone is very suitable for vocals, and that's why you find SM58s in every venue, almost in every place you go to. They will have an SM58. And when you pick up the microphone and you plug it in, it sounds right away suitable for vocals. You might need to do minor tweaks because not all the people sound the same, and that is normal. But the tweaks are very minor. But if I pick up a flat frequency response microphone, then you need to do even more work. So you need to emphasize a little bit on the high frequencies, remove the low frequencies, just like what this is manufactured like. So talking about vocal microphones can be used also for something else. And this is where the shift happens. So the easiest thing is to use any microphone for vocals with a little bit of tweaks or as they are. So most of the side address microphones that are made for voiceovers, they will already have that kind of tweaks or that minor coloration of reducing the lows and a little bit of emphasis on the highs. Now, this is already suitable to other instruments, which are instruments and no longer vocals. The first instrument that I can mention right now that is very suitable to use with vocal microphones anytime, anywhere, is wind instruments. So flute, saxophone, trumpets, the Arabic nai instrument, which is like the flute, and the recorder, which is also the basic instrument for flute. They use it in schools. Accordion as well. A lot of these instruments, they are very good and they are very useful to be recorded with vocal microphone. So if somebody asks you what is a good mic to record, a flute or a saxophone or a trumpet, SM58. Now there's a small trick with the SM58 is if you feel that you need more highs, the moment you place the mic in front of these instruments, if you feel you need more of that wind sound, anytime, simply just remove the grill. Removing the grill allows the microphone to be slightly more sensitive to high frequencies. Now, the reason the grill is blocking some of the high frequencies because it's also a pop shield. Now, what is a pop shield? It will step us backward just a little bit to vocals. When we say words like people, when we say abundant, when we say anything that has plosives, we blow some air, and that air blow on the microphone causes a lot of annoying sound. So here I have a magnet pop filter that comes on the KSM42. So whenever you buy the KSM42, it comes with this nice magnet pop filter. Now, since I'm using the same mic here, if I say the same word that I talked about, like people, abundant, few, and if I'm saying that with emphasis or I'm singing that, and usually it comes with more air force, you find that the microphone starts to bring out a lot of the air blow that is unwanted. So the pop filter blocks that. Same thing with the SM58. The grill here blocks a lot of the plosives. Now, some of them would still leak through because the grill is right on top of the diaphragm, and the distance between them is quite close. While when you use the magnet filter or the circular pop filter, you can at least space it away by 1 inch. Plus, that is already under that, when you put a pop filter, already there's the grill of the microphone, which also blocks plenty of the wind blow generated by some of the words. Now, with this microphone used to applications other than vocals, if you remove the grill, you allow the microphone to be slightly more sensitive to high frequencies. So this is a small trick that we use. And we mentioned that before as well, that removing the grill makes this an SM57 because the cartridge is exactly the same. So the SM57, as we know it, here, it has a pop filter, but it's extremely close to the cartridge, which makes this very similar to each other. And if you look at them, it looks very similar to the SM57. So this is a pop filter that is quite useful to protect the diaphragm, but still allow the high frequencies. And if you try to compare the SM57 to an SM58 with a grill on, you find the SM57 is more sensitive to plosives, which exhibits that the pop filter here is less efficient to vocals. So there are kits in the market from Shure, of course, it's an accessory, that you can add a windscreen, which is a foam cover to the 57 and makes it a good vocal mic again. And by the way, the presidential kit comes with the SM57 with the windscreen filter and this. And for a long time, it was sold as a presidential kit. 2 SM57s on a suspended mic holder, so it's not using the clip on, and the 2 windscreens. So, another application for the vocal microphones, which a lot of people might know, is using them for guitars. In the guitar, or acoustic guitar or electric, by the way. So in an acoustic guitar, for those who attended the webinar I did about acoustic guitar, you notice that I used the SM57. Now, SM57 has the same frequency tailoring done on the SM58. So less sensitivity to low frequencies and a better sensitivity to high frequencies. And you've noticed that it was quite useful recording the acoustic guitar. And the reason why is that you'd like that chimey sound of the strings to cut through with a moderate pickup of the low frequencies. And whenever you try a condenser microphone, a side address condenser microphone, without switching on the roll off, if you place that in front of the acoustic guitar, you find that it's too boomy or it has a lot of bass. So you find that you need to reduce the bass sensitivity whenever you use side address vocal microphone without switching on the low frequency roll off. So that makes it then quite useful as well. Another thing is when you use it with electric guitars in front of cabs. By the way, I'll have a special webinar about this because miking guitar amps is another science, and there's a lot of positions for this. So I cannot say simply just place the microphone in front of the cab and you get an adequate sound. The angle of the microphone, putting multiple microphones can change the sound. But basically, even the SM58 is a very good electric guitar microphone. And for those who have guitar amp simulation softwares or hardware, and you can select a microphone that is used for pickup, you can find the 58, number 58 and 57, and the SM7 should be there, including the 87 condenser microphone as well. So these are famous Shure microphones that are used in history to mic up guitar cabs, and each microphone has a different sound to the other, which kind of contributes in the coloration of the guitar sound. Also, you find these quite famous in the records. Now, the most famous microphone for miking guitar cabs is the SM57. Also, combining the SM57 with another 57 in a certain angle contributes in getting a completely different coloration. So there are clips in the market that can combine two microphones in a certain angle, 257s, in which it can result in a nice tone for guitar amps. And this is still a kind of a vocal microphone. So until now, we found that the SM57 and SM58 can do plenty of applications in terms of vocals and instruments, between guitars, vocals, wind instruments, and some string instruments. Now, whatever works for acoustic guitar would work for other instruments as well. So Arabic instruments like oud, buzuk, mandolin, as another Western instrument, ukulele, SM57 also works well. But now we're going to shift slightly to condenser microphones. So all the microphones I mentioned so far, they were dynamic microphone, except for the condenser microphones, side address microphones that are used in voiceovers. And the reason why you use condenser microphones in voiceovers is because you want to get the maximum clarity, and you want to allow the artist to let's say act his part. So if you're doing a voiceover, the artist is doing a drama part where he needs to act while he's recording, then a very close proximity is not going to be suitable in that case. So he needs to act. That means he needs to be slightly distanced from the microphone. So the distance here would not work perfectly with dynamic microphones. So condenser microphones then work perfectly. But when you go to other instruments, an example like mandolin and ukulele, or in some cases the oud as well, these instruments do not have a high SPL level. And that makes them a bit weak when you use them with dynamic microphones. So if you're recording in a studio, you might get away with this because you can make it up with a gain. And you remember when you talked about gain structure, you can make up the sensitivity or the loss of sensitivity with a microphone with a gain structure. Now, instead of that, you can use a condenser microphone. Now, condenser microphones tend to be more sensitive than instruments that naturally does not have a loud sound can work really well with condenser microphones. Also, instruments that are not quite big, that means they do not have enough physical vibrations in it versus the bigger ones. So I can set another example here, which is a viola versus a violin, or a cello versus a violin. So cellos generally have has more SPL generated versus violins. But also violas and cellos have more low frequency response that they generate versus violins. So do not get fooled by what your ears tell you all the time. Sometimes you feel that the violin is louder than a cello just because it has a higher pitch, and our ears are more sensitive to higher pitch. But when you mic that out, you will not be able to pick up the rest of the vibrations, the wood vibration that the violin generates. So then you need a condenser microphone to use with violins. And dynamic microphones tend to fail, let's say, in most situations, and you feel that you need to kind of over EQ them to make the sound more natural to the source. So with violins, cellos, violas, it's much better to use pencil microphones. First, they have a flat frequency response. They do not overcolor the source. They pick up the source exactly like it sounds. And most of those instruments, they sound nice as they are. So whenever you are in a hotel and you have let's say a trio playing in the background, let's say a violin, cello, and a piano, you hear them sounding good as they are. And if you just mic them as they are like with the pencil microphones, they sound amazing. So pencil microphones are very nice for sources that are not too loud, number one, and they sound good as they are. Another example to use flat response microphones or pencil microphones are choirs. Choirs also sound good as they are. And the other challenge with choirs is that you cannot mic them closely. Let's have an example of a choir with on a stairway case. Let's say you have 3 steps with males and females standing there singing along with music. If I put the mic 1 meter away to them, that means it's going to be 1 meter to the first level of the chorus, but it's going to be at least 3 meters away from the third level. So that means having the microphones in a close proximity to them is not useful. So the best way to mic choirs is to step away from them, 3 to 4 meters away, and aim the microphones to the upper side of the choirs, because already the lower side is closer to me anyway. So I kind of put them towards the mid or to the last step in the stadium or in the staircase where they are standing. Now, also choirs sound good in stereo, so it's good to use 2 microphones. So 1 mic on the side, 1 mic on the other side. So if you split the choir into 2 groups, 1 on the right, 1 on the left, 1 mic in the middle of the right group, 1 mic in the middle of the left group. And then you can record the choir exactly like you hear it with the same stereo spread. If the stereo spread is not important, then a single microphone in the middle would be quite good. But let's face it, 1 microphone in the middle is going to be close to the mid section of the choir, but the wider side is going to be too far. So that's not going to work perfectly. Now, we also can use the same method if you have a string section. And if the acoustics of the space that you're recording in sounds good, just like when you're in an opera, then close miking might not be, let's say, economic, and using few microphones in the same space where the strings are would give you the same kind of sound. But the same thing that we paid attention in the choir should be paid attention in the string section. So find the balance point where you are picking up most of the string section at the same distance, and using a pair of microphones would be also giving you the same kind of sound in stereo. Now, staying in the string section, but in slightly different instruments, let's talk about the double bass. Double bass, of course, from its sound, it's a bass instrument, and it sounds nicer with a nice heavy low end. And the double bass has a little bit of, let's say, there's a bit of an acquired taste for the string plucking while the player is playing that. But if he's playing with a bow, then you need to get a bit of the bow sound. So you need more of the low end frequency to be cutting through, because it's not quite strong from the instrument. If you play a double bass, you hear the bass out of it, but it's coming from everywhere. So miking it is a bit critical. So some microphones work efficiently with this mic, with this instrument. A good example to this are ribbon mics. This is one of the examples. For those who are following me on Instagram, you saw that the picture was a double bass with a similar microphone, but it's in red and black. Also, it's a ribbon microphone. Now, ribbon microphones have a large diaphragm. It's a large, actually, conductor. And that conductor actually vibrates easily on low frequencies with a kind of a fair response to high frequencies. So using these microphones with these instruments kind of brings out a lot of the real character of those instruments, and it sounds really great with them. So as per the picture on my Instagram, for those who are not following me, you can actually follow me anytime. It's Barry_at_Shure, and you can follow me there, and you can see the picture. Also, you can see the recording session that I used this mic at in South Africa. And everybody was quite attracted to the sound of that double bass with a ribbon microphone. Now, what alternatives do you have if you do not have a ribbon microphone? Condenser microphones tend to work well, pencil microphones as well. Dynamic microphones might not work perfectly, not because of the way they are built, it's because of the way they are tailored. Most of the dynamic microphones that are used, let's say the vocal microphones, SM57, SM58, they do not have a very good low frequency response because they're made like this. But the SM7B does have a very good low frequency response, and they respond really well to contrabass or double bass. So it's a good choice to use those microphones. But all these microphones, the ribbon mics and the SM7B, require good preamps. That means they require preamps with a fairly good amount of gain because they are low output. So whenever you need to use those microphones, make sure you have a preamp with a fairly good gain on it. We do also have very good preamps on the go if you want to use them. So the MVI and the X2U, these are like affordable preamps that are made as a problem solver initially, but they also have a very fair amount of gain. You can use those with these microphones and still bring out a lot of gain out of them without building up a lot of noise. But we will have a separate session about those preamps in different occasions, so don't hassle it if you didn't really get that now. Also, a very good mic that we mentioned right now, which is the SM7B, it's a very general purpose microphone. It can be good for vocals. It can be good for instruments. It can even be good for kick, as in for getting that nice jazzy kick sound. The SM7B works very well. Miking bass cabinets. So if you're playing an electric bass guitar, you can use these microphones to pick up the bass cabinet. Now, another general purpose microphone, in my opinion, is the KSM8. KSM8 is a new microphone with a flat frequency response. It's a very good general purpose microphone. It's not very good on bass sources. It starts to work from about 50 hertz onwards. But because it has a flat frequency response, it works really well with plenty of choices. There aren't many people trying it with anything other than vocals, but in the band I recorded in South Africa, I used the KSM8 to record the guitars, and it sounded amazing. I'll try to share a SoundCloud link to those who are registered afterwards, and there'll be a recording of plenty of microphones that I mentioned today in that band. Now, moving into the bass instrument as electric bass, since it's in the bass register, we treat it exactly like a kick. So kick microphones like Beta 58 or PGA 58 or Beta 91 can be good microphones to pick up bass frequencies. Beta 91, due to the way it's used or it's mounted, is not quite useful with bass cabs or bass amps because it lays flat on its back. So it's good to use it with kicks. You just place it inside the kick and it works. But with bass amps, it's not quite useful. So you can use the SM7B as we mentioned, or you can use the PGA 52 or Beta 52. And they work perfectly with these amps. Pianos do have a good combination of low frequencies and high frequencies. And pianos also, due to its physical shape, is quite wide. So we find that it's a very critical instrument to mic. You can mic it with a pair of microphones, probably a pair of Beta 27s or KSM 32 as a flat frequency response side address microphones. So you just place them in parallel on top of the strings when you open the lid, if it's a grand piano or baby grand. Or if it's a upright piano, from the back side of the piano, you place them right in parallel. So this kind of helps picking up plenty of that sound. In some occasions, some of the upright pianos, the front lid can be removed and then you can see the strings. So then you can also place the same microphones in front of those strings, the lower side and the upper side of the strings. Now, you can also add a third microphone. And in that case, I would choose either an SM7B or a ribbon mic 353, the KSM 353, which is the silver microphone here, or the 313, which is in the picture I showed before on my Instagram, which is the red and black. So this one, I can place it in the middle of the piano if it's an upright. If it's a grand, in the middle of the intersection where the low strings connect with the high strings. And then I can put this in mono. So this one, I'll add it on a third channel, and the first two microphones will be hand right and left. Now, if I'm using this technique, I can also use a pair of pencil microphones, SM81 or KSM 137, plus a mono microphone in that place. In some grand pianos, in that curve in the middle, you can also place the Beta 91. You can just use some tape and just tape it there, in addition to two XY or ORTF positioning microphones, so two parallel or an XY for the piano, and you can bring plenty of that sound. By the way, recording pianos with the MV88 Plus is quite good as well. We've tried with a band in UAE called the Box Tones. We did a recording with the Motive microphones, and we used the MV88 Plus to record the piano, and it came out to be really nice. So we placed the microphone right at the end of the grand piano. There's a bit of a space there on a tripod, and we used the XY on a wide angle, about 120, and it sounded great as it is. So that leaves us with drums. We already did the drums miking session last week. We saw the capabilities of some of the microphones, but generally with drums, you can easily get away with a single microphone in the kick and two XYs on the top. It will balance really well. You can pick up plenty of the sound, especially if the drums is in the room. Drums can work well with vocal microphones. So you find most of the time the snare is mic'd up with an SM57, including the toms, because then naturally there's plenty of low frequencies on those, but it's not too much high frequencies. So it's good to use a vocal microphone to mic up drums, except the kick and the floor tom. The floor tom, you need a microphone that has a better low frequency response, kind of get that out into the circuitry. So you can use pencil microphones for the toms, the floor toms, and the kick. It's good to use a kick microphone anytime, anywhere. So Beta 52, PGA 52, the Beta 91. These are very good kick microphones. So out of what I said today, you can always venture on your own in using microphones based on the characteristics of these microphones. So you can always do trial and error, but also you can just kind of stick to what I said until you kind of get more practice and have more ideas. I will add the one small part here to two instruments. It's the violins and flutes, which you can use the lav microphones simply because they're too small, so they will not add any hindrance to the player. The other thing is that certain microphones in the market have a very good frequency response. So an example is the Shure Twinplex. This is the Twinplex. This has two diaphragms on the lavalier, which brings a lot of bass response on this microphone. That sounds very close to a nice handheld microphone. Though it's small, it doesn't sound thin. So using those on violins brings up plenty of the low end that is missing from the violin on a far distance. Same thing with cellos, even double basses. So this is a very good microphone. Now there's a head-worn version of that, which is called the TH53. So it's a twin-plex version with the head-worn. If a flute player likes to use lav microphones, he can use the head-worn microphones, and it will work perfectly as well. There are other versions of the head-worn microphones, which are the Beta 53 and Beta 54. These are good head-worn microphones that works with the same purpose with flutes, Nye as well. There is also the SM31 that works good with those instruments. Of course, you get better results with the betas and the twinplex versus the SM31 due to the nature of the builds of these microphones and the way they are sensitive. This kind of sums up the how to select a microphone according to my experience generally. I wish I had my colleague Fali today to kind of get a bit of sharing from him, but due to the change in time today, we could not have him on board, but hopefully in the next sessions we will. So now I will go into the Q&A session. So again, you have the icon on your right side that says Q&A. You can type in your questions there, and then you can feel free to ask me anything or any scenario that you like. And I'll, of course, answer these questions. So I'm going to start with the first question here from Hassan. He's saying, does the WS81 do magic in the vocals? Why do they love it for presidential speeches more than the SM58? I think you mean the SM81. Now, let's put it this way. Whenever the vocalist is not too close to the mic, so in presidential kits, sometimes they use the SM81. Mostly it's the SM57, to be honest. But I've seen cases where they have also SM81 on the podium. The reason why it's a condenser microphone, and because it's a condenser microphone, it's more sensitive to far sources. So you're not going to find the president doing this in front of the microphone. So you want to stand still, keep his posture, and, you know, do his speech. So the microphone has to be positioned far away. So usually they put a pair of 81s or a single one, depends on how big the hole is. And this way the microphone will be sensitive enough to pick up the voice from a far distance. There are specific microphones made for podiums, like the MX416 or 412 or 418. These are podium mics. There are condenser microphones, and the 4 is the whole series. They're all the same, but the 412 is 12-inch, the 416 is 16-inch, and the 418 is 18 inches long. So that means the microphone can be extended closer to the speaker, in which he doesn't need to dunk or get closer to the microphone. So it's just decreasing the distance. So that is the only reason. Of course, there should be EQing done on the desk to kind of enhance a bit of the high frequencies on these microphones to make it more adequate for vocals. Hope that answers the question. Another question here from Rim. I have a Audio-Technica 2050. I use it to stream live when I play games on Twitch. I'm not a gamer, so mind my ignorance here. So sometimes her viewers tell her that her voice is peaking, okay, when she yells and she gets loud. That is a good question. Now, you need to know a lot of these gaming microphones, they are not built to handle high SPL. Some of them are made with a condenser capsule, some of them are with a dynamic. I think this one is a condenser. But the thing is that first, there are two things that are known in professional microphones. One of them I mentioned is the bass roll-off. The second one I would mention is something called the padding or attenuation. So this is an SM27. It's a very good, I don't want to call it an entry microphone because that would not give it justice. This microphone is actually a very good, it's a very professional microphone, but the price on this is actually quite affordable. Now this one has a minus 15 decibel switch in addition to the bass roll-off. Now the minus 15 decibels here makes the microphone less sensitive to some extent. Now that means the microphone can handle yelling or loud sources before peaks the circuitry inside. Now the peaking that you're hearing in your or that your viewers are complaining about, it means that the preamp inside the mic is reaching to its maximum level due to the input source that you're doing. So when you are yelling, the preamp inside is getting to the maximum, and that generates the clipping, or what they call it, electronic clipping, which is an unwanted sound, especially with solid state microphones. With tube microphones, so anything that has a tube preamp, it tends less to generate that kind of clipping. It's softer because it has a soft clipping, and it can handle higher SPL. But of course, these microphones are way more expensive. Next session, I think next week, we're going to talk about why do we need expensive microphones? What makes it an expensive microphone different than an affordable microphone? And this is where I'm going to talk about the differences. But generally, when you use a microphone with a dedicated interface, for example, when you use an SM27 or a PGA27 with the Motive MVI, you have control over the gain, you have control over the behavior of the preamp, so you can add a limiter there. And adding a limiter there, which is a form of a compressor, can help you enhance the low voices. So when you're speaking quietly, it's still there. But whenever you get excited about something and you start yelling, automatically it limits that and stops the circuit from causing the limitation, or causing that, not limitation, causing the distortion, which is the clipping. So a straightforward answer to you need to get a more sophisticated microphone. And of course, if let's say any of the content creators, if he's a gamer or if he's a blogger, vlogger, a YouTuber, whenever that kind of activity is generating money for you, I strongly advise that you start to reinvest a little bit of money into bringing up your gear to the upper level. So this is something I was talking about in some of my Instagrams, is that whenever you find a musician placing his phone on a stand and picking up an instrument and start to play on live Instagram, I saw a lot of people getting turned off right now by this because they expect a good quality audio from a musician. So whenever it sounds boomy and it's a bit clipping and sounds like it's in a toilet or, in a bathroom, it's a turn off. So mind if I said toilet, but, I'm talking about the echo kind of thing. So whenever you are on a platform and this is generating money for you, it's very advisable to invest in some of the gear that can help you step up your game. So for us, let's say all the Motive series are quite in an affordable range. Everybody can actually buy these microphones, but it steps up your game massively. For those who are following me on Instagram, whenever I do my live streams, I do it with the same microphone I'm using here, using the MVI. So people who are watching me live on Instagram, they get the same quality you guys are hearing right now on the webinar. So that is quite an advantage in that case. So I hope that answered your question. We have another question here from Salah. What is the right choice of microphones for the stereo recording like Symphony sessions? That is a very good question. And if you paid attention to the webinars I did about the acoustic guitars when I talked about the stereo miking, if you just try to search for stereo microphone techniques, you find at least 4 famous techniques. The first one is the XY, where the mics are 90 degrees. Second one is the ORTF. That's for the Office Radio Television of France. It's a French technique, which means two parallel microphones with an angle of 110. Can be bigger or smaller, but it's in parallel, and it can be distanced from at least 8 inches up to how much you want. There is the mid-side recording, which we also mentioned in the acoustic guitar recording. You can also find that live right now on YouTube. If you follow Shure MEA on YouTube, you can find the recordings of the webinar, so you can hear the same recordings of the acoustic guitar that I did using those techniques. Now, these techniques as well can be used in symphony sessions or string sessions. In some places where the natural reverb of the place is good, you can extend the same techniques that I said, but with shotgun microphones. Now, shotgun microphones are not really instrument microphones, and not so many use them for instruments, but in some operas or in churches, they actually use them because the natural reverb of that place is musical. So the shotgun microphone is a condenser microphone with a lower polar pattern, so it's like a beam from the front. You can aim it from a very far distance, so you can actually do 15, 20 meters away if you want to pick up that reverb. So you can do a pair of those faced up, and you can pick up the symphony naturally as if it sounds in the room. By the way, they use the same microphones as well in live performances and concerts. So they place 2 shotgun microphones, sometimes 4, the big stadium, aiming to the crowd. So whenever the crowd is cheering, they feed that up in the recording to pick up the same ambience, the same sound of the cheering and the ambience in the stadium. So hope that answered the question. If there's any more questions, feel free to write it in. Meanwhile, I'll share again that you can always follow us on my Instagram. This is a dedicated Instagram I personally put to kind of help in the sharing and education. So it's Barry _at written as an AT and not the ATA _Shure, Barry at Shure. And of course, on YouTube channel, you can follow Shure MEA. Also on Facebook, you can look for Shure MEA page, and you can follow us up there for the latest news. So since we do not have any more questions, I hope you guys had a good session today, and feel free to message us anywhere on any of our platforms. We will be able to answer any of these questions. And if there's anything that you'd like us to speak about in any of our sessions coming up next in the next months, please also either direct message me or send us a message on Facebook, and we will put that in our schedules. Meanwhile, I wish you have a very pleasant day and hope to see you very soon. Have a good evening and see you soon. Bye.